building a better Bay Area, moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, we'll dig into Governor Newsom's plan to push a bill to crack down on guns in California, but it's based on the Texas abortion law that he himself has criticized. Is he making a political statement or playing legal chess with the Supreme Court? Also, we're bringing on a college admissions expert to answer all your questions as we've reached that most stressful time of year to finalize and submit college applications. So if you know a high school senior or a transfer applicant, make sure they're watching. And we'll talk about the breaking news impacting the entire state. An indoor mask mandate will be back in effect starting this Wednesday through January 15th. Because of a spike in cases since Thanksgiving. Much more on that with Dr. Patel in just a moment. But first, a serious winter storm is here. The weather is our top story, so let's bring in Spencer Christian. How's it looking out there, Spencer?
Well, Kristen, it has been a very stormy day. It remains a stormy day. In fact, we've had a couple of stormy days yesterday and today. Let me give you a look at Live Doppler 7. You can see where the most intense storminess is right now. We've got areas who had waves of heavy downpours with little breaks in between today. Right now, the entire Bay Area is wet, but the heaviest activity at the moment is along that line that you can clearly see reaching from Fairfield south westward down through the Oakland area, across the bay down to San Mateo, and another area, another wave of storms moving through the North Bay right now between San Rafael and the Golden Gate. So we've got periods of heavy rain. What's left of this current storm, I shouldn't say what's left of it, our current storm ranks 3 on the storm impact scale, and that is a storm of strong intensity. Until 6 p.m., we expect more periods of heavy rain, strong gusty wind. Thunderstorms are possible. They could develop during this time period. Now, after 6 p.m., this storm will weaken just a little. It will still be a significant storm, but we'll downgrade it to a level 2 storm. So between 6 p.m. this evening and 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, we expect more light to moderate showers, colder, less rain than we're having right now, and snow in the higher elevations of the Bay Area mixing in with the rain. It's going to be a stormy evening commute for sure. A wind advisory remains in effect until 4 p.m. for virtually all of the Bay Area except the North Bay counties of Marin, Napa, and Sonoma. Wind gusts could reach 55 miles per hour. Crossing bridges will be very challenging with wind gusts like that. Downed trees and power lines are a possibility under these conditions. And over in the Sierra, as you probably know, heavy snow is falling with this storm and continues to fall tonight and tomorrow until tomorrow morning until tomorrow evening rather at 10 p.m. 10 o'clock tomorrow night. This winter storm warning remains in effect for the Sierra. We expect at elevations above 3,500 feet, 3 to 5 feet of heavy snow, and in the higher peaks, 6 to 8 feet of snow could fall in the Sierra. Emergency travel only will be allowed. Now, back here in the Bay Area, our storm concerns today are very high for urban and road flooding. Moderate concerns for small stream flooding, debris flow, and mudslides. Moderate concern also for downed trees and power lines. It's going to be a very stormy evening before things start to settle down.
I know, and so dangerous too. Yeah. Spencer, thank you so much. I know you'll have much more information for us on ABC 7 News at 4. Yeah. All right, right now we want to get to other breaking news. Get your masks and don't put them away because California's Health and Human Services Secretary just announced major news. Universal indoor mask wearing will be required across the state for 1 month beginning this Wednesday, the 15th, and ending January 15th. Joining us right now to talk about this is ABC 7 News special correspondent, Dr. Alok Patel. Dr. Patel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And when I saw you flash that mask up, Kristen, I tried to find one to match you, and I can't even find one on my table.
That's all right. I'm sure you have a drawer full of them, and you're going to need them because Dr. Galley cited increasing COVID cases in making this declaration of the indoor mask coming back for at least 1 month. So tell us, is the increase actually dramatic in the state of California?
Well, the increase, Kristen, if you look at the actual number, what was cited, what I just saw, is going from about 9 per 100,000 to 14 out of 100,000. Now, someone might look at those numbers and say, that's not a huge increase, but I think this might be an overabundance of caution, number one, because we don't really have the concrete evidence about how widespread and severe Omicron really could be. And we don't really know what the trajectory is going to look like and how many more people could potentially get infected. But I think the preliminary data right now is actually reassuring that even though it's more contagious, so far it doesn't look like it's causing more severe disease. And what is concerning people is the fact that some of those lab studies are showing that our vaccines may be a little bit weaker against Omicron than Delta.
All right. So a lot of unknowns. I get it. That's part of what's driving this. But is this really about us, like here in the Bay Area, or is this really targeting the counties, right, that are not going to have a lot of universal mask wearing, that don't have such rules, that don't have high vaccination rates, and that have higher case rates?
You know, Kristen, I think it feels like certain counties are being punished, if you will, for the actions of others. And I think it's important that we approach this in two ways. Number one, we look at this as saying that we're one kind of unified state, we're one unified country. I know it hasn't felt that way during the pandemic, but that's how it's being approached. But, you know, it's also important that there's a little bit more transparency about these decisions. Now, when we just see an announcement saying there's a mask mandate, I worry that it sends mixed signals. And some people say, well, hey, I guess the vaccine doesn't work because there's a breakthrough case, when we all know that the breakthrough case itself is not what matters. Severe disease, hospitalizations is what we're going after. And I have not seen numbers showing that those are actually increasing. Now, those could be lagging 2 weeks after this rise in positive cases. But I think there needs to be a little bit more transparency about what went into this decision and why it's kind of showing up right now in New York City and California.
Yeah, because aren't doctors starting to say, hey, let's make policy decisions based on hospitalizations and not cases, right? And especially because many cases are mild, it seems like Omicron is leading to more contagion, but, you know, not necessarily more potency.
Absolutely. And then I wouldn't say starting to say that, Kristen. I think we've been saying that.
True.
You and I have talked about this for about a year now. And you look at testing positive for SARS-CoV-2, it doesn't matter what variant it is. You know, that there's testing positive, and then there's that actually transforming into COVID-19. And, you know, these lab studies that showed, hey, there's a drop in antibody level. All the studies so far and all the real world data does still show that the 2-dose vaccine series is very good at preventing severe illness and death against the Omicron variant. And the 3-dose is actually holding up beautifully. And these studies are only looking at an antibody response. That's not the complete picture with the immune system. So I think the bottom line is, even though this headline says mask mandates are coming into play, I hope there's more data. I hope there's an off-ramp point, and I hope people still realize that the vaccines are incredibly effective.
So yes or no, does this surprise you?
Yes. This does surprise me. Just, you know, the headline coming out without the explanation does surprise me. And I understand that we've fallen behind the other variant. Last summer, things were loosened. Delta showed up and said, cancel all your fall plans. And I think so I understand where this is coming from. You know, I would have been less surprised if there was more of a tiered approach and there was a little bit more of an explanation. But one thing I want to remind people is, if you see a headline talking about an Omicron death, that is not a reason to be alarmed. Remember that we are still losing about 1,000 Americans every day to Delta.
Right.
And Delta is still what the biggest threat is right now.
Right here. Okay. Does this supersede county rules? It does, right?
From what I understand, it does. And then, you know, I think this is going to get tricky in terms of not only what the rules really are going to look like, but also in reinforcement. Now, I did see the rules about, you know, 1,000-person super event. And if you're unvaccinated, you have to show proof of a test, antigen or PCR test sooner than that 72-hour window. That I totally agree with. If you're unvaccinated, I can't make an assessment about whether or not you're positive. Right. In terms of flying back to California and getting tested within 3 to 5 days, you know, is that going to be on the honor system? Is it going to be enforced? I'm not really sure, but I do think it's important that we're sending a message and saying, hey, we need to really finally get on top of this so that we can be in a good place, and hopefully these restrictions can be lifted on January 15th.
Yeah, just to clarify for our viewers, yes, it does supersede county rules. That means if you live in Solano County, which currently doesn't have an indoor mask mandate, well, you're going to have to wear your mask indoors going grocery shopping, to the movie theaters. Or if you're in Marin County, which had dropped theirs, right, you would have to put them back on. And in San Francisco, of course, it was like dropped unless you're, you know, in places where you can ascertain everybody's vaccinated and you can control the access.
It's so confusing. Yeah.
It is. Okay. So right now, December 15th through January 15th, indoor mask mandate is back in California. Dr. Patel, based on this and based on what drove this, the fact that cases are up 47% since Thanksgiving, how should we adjust our holiday plans, if at all?
You know, I don't think we need to really adjust our holiday plans as long as we're doing what we've talked about before. And that's obviously making sure you're vaccinated, but paying attention to where you're traveling, what vaccination rates, what community spread looks like at that destination, and having a very open conversation with people in your family and making sure that people around you are vaccinated. And for whatever reason, if someone isn't, making sure that they've gotten a test, that they're negative also, because any event that you hold this holiday season could turn into a super spreader event to some degree. And I think that's an important thing that people should be paying attention to this holiday season.
All right, Dr. Patel, thank you so much for joining us, talking about this breaking news with Dr. Mark Galley saying that Californians will once again have to wear masks indoors universally from December 15th through January 15th to curtail.
As long as, if it just keeps schools and businesses open, keep the masks instead.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. We'll see you again later. Take care. Coming up next, we'll get into Governor Newsom's plan to crack down on guns based off of the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion laws in Texas. What is that about? We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today. As you know, it is a stormy, stormy day. So as I prepare for our next guest to talk about Governor Newsom's latest attention-getting move, this time to try to get at assault weapons in California using the very same rationale behind the Texas law, which, of course, he decried. That is coming up next. Meantime, please enjoy this view of a rainy Bay Area. All right, you guys, finalizing my last question here. Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back. We are in the height of the stressful, pressure-filled college application season. Early decisions are coming out this week and next, and the students applying under regular decision have only about 3 weeks to get everything done. If you have a high school senior and have questions, we have just the expert for you today. Joining us is the Dean of College Advising at the Jewish Community High School of the Bay in San Francisco, Lauren Cook. Lauren, thanks for making the time. I know you have so many students needing your help right about now. Appreciate it. We're going to jump right into it. Do signs point to yet another year of record, applications in terms of the numbers at elite colleges?
I think it's entirely possible. Data on that is sort of trickling out right now. So I've gotten a couple of heads up and emails from early colleges that released decisions last week that numbers seem to be up. I think it's too early to say that that's a major trend, but I don't think they're going to be down this year. If anything, they might stay in kind of a plateaued range.
Okay, so acceptance rates will remain pretty tough, and that causes more stress. Early decisions, of course, coming in right now. Regular, just around the corner. That's when most people apply. Look, for anyone who's not bound to a college after this early round, what should they be doing in the next 3 weeks that they have to, find the right mix of colleges to apply to and to improve their chances? What could they do?
Yeah, I think if they've already applied to some places, it might be time to return to their application and see if there's any updating to be done to their activities. If something has happened this fall with winning an award or a leadership position, some new research, just to make sure that everything's as up to date as possible. to be continuing to work on their senior grades. I think there's often this misconception or, sort of wishful thinking amongst a lot of seniors that by the time you hit this year, you're sort of done, with your schoolwork. But every college is going to ask for a mid-year to kind of see what's happening with grades in senior year. So to definitely still stay on top of that homework. And if you're still looking for, a few colleges to add to your list, I really like a search engine that is on the College Board website called Big Future. There's a great guidebook called the FIS Guide to Colleges. It's actually a book that's sort of the size of a telephone book that describes colleges in a very sort of neutral third-party way. It's not quite the sales job you might get from the colleges themselves. And of course, to talk to friends and family members and your college counselor if you have one.
Okay, so as I understand, 99% of colleges out there are still test optional this year. So if students have the choice, how should they decide whether they send in their test scores or not?
Excellent question. There's a lot of data on college websites, on other resources online. I would always go and look to see what the average admitted student test score is from previous classes, as well as the range of kind of the middle 50%. So the kids that are, somewhere between the 25th to the 75th percentile of admitted students. And if you're falling within that range and you have a test score, I kind of lean towards submitting it because there are still students that don't have test scores in this moment. If you're falling within who they've admitted in the past, and it's going to give you that extra data point that another student might not have, it probably makes sense to go ahead and submit it. I would, with a caveat though, not look real closely at 2020 data, right? Because that's going to be very skewed. There were so many students that couldn't test that year, especially from the state of California. So go back to 2019, 2018 data and really try and make some decisions from there. And talk to your college counselor if you have one. We're great at trying to, spitball what to do in these scenarios.
Yes, you are. Look, we know top grades and scores are just a starting point, though. Most elite schools are looking for kids with a standout narrative, right? So what questions should kids ask themselves when deciding what to highlight about themselves?
Yeah, I think if there is a major that you have, indicated you're interested in and you've done things, sort of building your narrative towards your interest in that major, obviously highlight those. Internships, research, if you did a community college class, especially, during the pandemic summer, I know a lot of students went into, online classes with a local community college to still fill their time. So to talk about those and how you've kind of built that story. But then I also think, colleges are really, and I saw this especially last year, very aware of the current civil rights environment in the country, and especially post, George Floyd protests last summer, more questions were being asked last year on applications, and I'm assuming that that's holding true this year as well, around identity, community, equity. They're really pushing students to reflect on those things and talk about how they might show up on a college campus as a roommate and a classmate and all the rest. And are they aware of these issues and able to talk about them and what they might contribute to the environment?
All right, we got to talk about money because college is expensive. When should kids apply for financial aid, look for merit scholarships? Like wait till they get accepted or start now?
No, start now. And if anyone applied anywhere early action or early decision, they likely already had financial aid deadlines to submit some materials. But for any regular decision deadlines, I know the UCs, the CSUs, they might have dates printed of February 1st or March 1st for, the deadline for paperwork. But I would say the earlier you can get it in, the better, especially with public institutions and the FAFSA. With a lot of institutions, it's a first come, first serve basis for financial aid. So the earlier and further along you can get in line, the better. And then in terms of merit aid, there's a lot of different resources to look at online. I would just caution students to try and find things to apply for that are going to be in larger amounts. So applying for a bunch of $500 scholarships might be spinning your reels a little bit in terms of the amount of time you're expending on something. Look for the larger amounts. Look for awards that are for more specific populations. I know, there's a Coca-Cola award. Millions of kids could apply for that. But if there's an award for kids in Marin County, for lacrosse players, for Jewish students, as I have for kids at my school, that's going to narrow the competition, right? And so look for things that are sort of specific to populations that might relate to you.
All right.
And then keep in mind, Oh, go ahead.
Lauren Cook, we have so much. We could do a whole show, but we are out of time for today. I'm just going to end with the advice that I know you wanted to give. Submit like a couple days in advance. Don't wait till the last day. The portal could crash. We saw it again with UC this year. Lauren, Dean of College Advising at the Jewish Community High School of the Bay in San Francisco, really appreciate your insight.
No, thanks so much, Kristen.
Take care. All right, coming up next, we'll look at Governor Newsom's plan to crack down on guns and whether that idea is legal. We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, folks, stick around. We have another great guest coming up for you after this break. Another shot for you so you can see how the Bay Area is going through a severe storm right now. It's a 3 on our storm impact scale. Here we go. Last guest of the day.
7, 6, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Governor Gavin Newsom is taking the Supreme Court's ruling on the strict abortion ban in Texas and using that as a model for a new bill to crack down on guns here in California. He's directing his staff to work with lawmakers and the Attorney General to craft legislation that would let Californians sue anyone who manufactures, distributes, or sells an assault weapon or ghost gun here in California. Joining us now is Jessica Levinson, a professor at Loyola Law School and host of the Passing Judgment podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Levinson.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Sorry about the background.
Oh, that's totally fine. Please explain to us in great detail what the governor is envisioning here, that any Californian like you or me, we could sue for damages up to $10,000, even if we're not personally harmed or related to anyone who's been harmed by an assault weapon?
Exactly. So the governor looked at the Supreme Court decision coming out of Texas. The Supreme Court basically gave a roadmap for states who want to pass laws that might be either unconstitutional or constitutionally questionable, and said to states, okay, if you want to pass those laws, you can insulate them from judicial review. And Governor Newsom read that. He said, I don't agree with that, but if we can now pass laws that will insulate us from judicial review, which really means that it'll be very, very difficult for a federal court to stop these laws before they go into effect and or to prevent those laws from continuing to be in effect, he said, then I want to enshrine protection against assault weapons and these ghost gun permits. Now, it is important to remember that these are actually part of our current penal code. But what would change, to your question, is that instead of the state enforcing those laws, it would be a private individual. As you said, it could be you, it could be me. We don't know what the amount would be. We don't know if it would be $10,000 like the Texas abortion law, but that's the idea. Private right of action would insulate states from federal judicial review.
And talk about why this opening up who has standing, the fact that anybody can sue, is so potent and powerful compared to just, the state having to enforce the law, but just saying, hey, anyone can sue.
It's a great, great question, because by saying that it's going to be a private individual who can sue to enforce the law, then it's not clear who can be sued to try and stop the law. And that's what's going on in Texas. Really, all of the arguments in Texas yesterday in the Supreme Court, last week in the Supreme Court, were about who can be sued to stop this law from going into effect, or who can be sued to stop this law from continuing in effect. When you have a private individual, not the state, who's enforcing it, then it's not clear that there's any person that you can haul into federal court to say, look, you need to stop enforcement of this law. And that's why we say it's insulated from judicial review. It means that we don't know who to sue in federal court.
Right. And the impact in Texas has already been that providers who are scared, not knowing who can sue them, right, or who they can go challenge, they've kind of stopped doing what they do. And so I don't know if Governor Newsom is trying to achieve that here. Or do you? OK, so what needs to happen is he has to get a bill written, right? The legislature has to pass something. Of course, there will be court challenges. Do you think what the governor wants is a challenge all the way up to the Supreme Court to force the court to either then strike down Texas or stay consistent and then give California essentially this new way to try to get a handle on assault weapons?
Absolutely. So I think that for Governor Newsom, if he wins in the Supreme Court, then he can say, look, I was first in the nation. I was the first person to take this roadmap that the Supreme Court talked about in the Texas case and to try and protect us against assault weapons and ghost gun kits. If he loses before the Supreme Court, I think it's still a political win because he can say, look, again, I was first in the nation. I tried to protect you. And I was thwarted by a conservative Supreme Court, the most conservative court we've had maybe in a century. So for Governor Newsom, I think it's a win either way if this goes before the Supreme Court.
All right. But, you know, regardless of whether it's a political win for him, do you foresee just a flood of states, red states or blue states, just passing bills to invalidate any Supreme Court decision they don't like? And if that floodgate is open, is that a good or bad thing?
So maybe. I think that other states, depending on what happens in California, depending if they have the appetite for it, could say, okay, well, we want to pass a law with respect to free speech, freedom of religion. I mean, these are all the things we talked about when we were talking about the Texas case, that if a court really wants to say we can't review these laws, then it's not just going to be about abortion. Now, I tend to think, though, that once one of these laws gets to the Supreme Court, the court will say, well, we really only meant that with respect to abortion, not with respect to gun control. And there are differences in those two, but I think this conservative court won't allow Governor Newsom's plan to stand. And that could limit how many states, want to try this tack. We just don't know when it will land before the Supreme Court.
And on that note, we'll have to wrap it up on air. Let's continue this conversation on our streaming platforms.
In commercial break.
We have a couple more minutes on streaming to finish up our conversation. Sadly, we had to take a commercial break, got to pay the bills. But I do wonder, you were starting to talk about how they could delineate between these topics that, all these states could come to them with. Look, some say this court believes the Constitution guarantees the right to bear arms, firearms, and not the right for women to obtain abortions or control their reproductive rights. Is that a fair interpretation of what this court is sending out as a signal?
I think so. So on the one hand, Governor Newsom is actually on stronger ground here because what he's proposing is a law that's not clearly unconstitutional, whereas Texas's law under the current framework is clearly unconstitutional. But I think for the reasons that you talked about, it may be that he's not ultimately successful in the Supreme Court because the court will say, well, there is no right to privacy. There is no right to abortion written in the Constitution. And let's remember, by the time this case actually goes to the Supreme Court, they might have overturned Roe, whereas they'll say, look, I'm looking at the Second Amendment, I'm looking at the words, that's written in the Constitution. So that could be one way for the court.
Interesting. Look, it seems like this court is certainly ceding more and more decisions to the states, and certainly the big decisions. Could that lead to an increasingly polarized America, the two Americas that many people fear?
Absolutely. I think the more control we give to the states, the less federal control there is, the more you're going to have not just women when it comes to abortion, but people when it comes to a whole host of rights, really living in two very different Americas, depending on what the governor and their state legislatures allow.
All right, Professor Jessica Levinson, we could probably talk for another half hour, but I know you got to get back to your day job, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you for talking to us from your car.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
We are back in 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And thanks for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Today, the big headline, a statewide mask mandate for all indoor settings starting Wednesday through January 15th. Much more on this on ABC 7 News at 4. I'll see you then.